The Lost Chronicle of Two Worlds. Hook. Imagine uncovering a diary buried beneath the floorboards of an abandoned New England farmhouse, a diary written by a man who should not have existed, describing events that history pretends never happened. This is that story. The November wind cut sharply across the Connecticut Valley as Jonathan Hale stepped out of his SUV. The old farmhouse stood at the edge of Stillwater Road, leaning as though the next hard gust might take it down for good. He had been here once when he was 12, but the house felt different now, hollowed out, yet strangely expectant. Jonathan tugged his jacket tighter and walked toward the porch. The boards groaned under his feet, announcing his presence to a house that had not heard human steps in nearly 50 years. His grandmother, Eleanor Hale, had died only 3 weeks earlier. Her will contained one unexpected line: "Jonathan is to inherit the Stillwater property. He will know what to do when the time comes." He didn't know what she meant. Not yet. Inside, the air was stale with dust and time. Sunlight cut through the cracked windows in thin, slanted beams. The living room was almost empty except for a toppled bookshelf and a single armchair. Jonathan set down the box of tools he'd brought and exhaled. Let's get this over with. He headed for the back room, his grandmother's old study. The smell of cedar lingered here, battling the must of neglect. Papers were stacked everywhere, as if Eleanor had simply stepped away mid-project. Jonathan knelt to pick up a set of folders that had spilled across the floor. That's when he noticed something. A seam in the floorboards. Subtle, but unmistakable. Curiosity prickled through him. He set the folders aside, fetched a flathead screwdriver from his toolbox, and wedged the tip into the groove. The board lifted surprisingly easily. Beneath it lay a small wooden compartment. Inside the compartment was a single object, a leather-bound journal, the cover darkened with age, the edges frayed. There was no title, only a symbol burned into the leather, a symbol Jonathan recognized but could not place. He opened the first page. April 14, 1775. My name is Nathaniel Brooks, and if this chronicle is ever found, know that the history you have been taught is incomplete. What follows is the true account of the events that shaped the fate of two nations and nearly tore apart two worlds. Jonathan froze. The date, the name, the implication. Nathaniel Brooks lived during the American Revolution. But as far as Jonathan knew, Nathaniel Brooks was not a real historical figure. Yet the handwriting, the material, the ink, everything about the journal felt authentic. And so he began to read. Nathaniel's first entries described pre-revolution Boston with stunning detail, its cobblestone streets, the simmering tension between colonists and crown, the unmistakable sense that war hung in the air like a brewing storm. But then the narrative shifted. Nathaniel spoke of a meeting held in secret beneath the city, not a meeting of the Sons of Liberty, Jonathan expected that, but something far stranger. A coalition of scientists, philosophers, and spies from the colonies and from a group Nathaniel referred to cryptically as the Observers. Jonathan frowned. The Observers? Nathaniel described them as if they were human, yet not entirely, as if they had knowledge beyond the limits of the era, technology beyond the imaginable. Jonathan flipped the page. They showed us the device today, a mechanism of gears and memory, capable of reading patterns in the very fabric of nature. They claim it can predict the course of empires, perhaps even alter them. Jonathan exhaled, pulse quickening. This sounded impossible. Yet the descriptions of Boston, the references to real revolutionary figures, Samuel Adams, Dr. Joseph Warren, Paul Revere, were detailed and historically accurate. And the handwriting was consistent, precise, unmistakably 18th century. Jonathan turned the page again, and again. Hours passed. The deeper he went, the more impossible the story became, and the more real it felt. He read about battles that happened differently than the textbooks described, alliances history had buried, and a secret mission assigned to Nathaniel, one that could change everything Jonathan thought he knew. By the time dusk settled outside the broken windows, Jonathan realized something simple and terrifying. If the journal was authentic, it was the most important historical discovery in over 200 years, and someone, maybe many someones, had gone to great lengths to hide it. Nathaniel's eyes strained in the fading light as he turned to the next brittle page. The ink here was darker, the handwriting more hurried, as though Nathaniel had written these words under duress. April 18, 1775. Tonight the riders set out, but not as the histories will one day claim. Revere was only one of them, and not even the most important. Jonathan leaned closer. Dr. Joseph Warren summoned me at twilight. He entrusted me with a mission separate from Revere's, one that could not be spoken aloud, even to the Sons of Liberty. I was to escort an observer operative, codename Lumen, to a location known only as Site 19. Jonathan blinked. Site 19? There was no such place in colonial records. Lumen carried with him a fragment of the device, one that if captured by the Crown would shift the balance of forces indescribably. The British regulars had orders far beyond seizing rebel munitions. They sought the observers themselves. Jonathan felt a chill dance across his arms. We rode southwest under moonless skies, avoiding the main roads. Lumen kept his hood low, though I sensed he needed no light to navigate. His presence made even the horses uneasy. At one point, he warned me, "The path diverges tonight. You must choose whether to follow history or truth." The next lines were smudged, as if Nathaniel's hand had trembled. Before I could answer, we heard musket fire, far off, yet close enough to send panic through the fields. Not the militia, not the regulars, something else, something hunting. Jonathan exhaled sharply. He turned the page. 3 riders approached from the east, silhouettes against the dark. Patriots? British scouts? No, their horses made no sound. Their lanterns gave off no flame. Jonathan's pulse quickened. Lumen whispered, "Shadow riders. They were not meant to be here yet." A note in the margin, written later in different ink, caught Jonathan's eye. I did not know it then, but this was the moment the 2 timelines began to diverge. He swallowed. The narrative continued. We fled north toward Concord, but the Shadow Riders gained quickly. Lumen instructed me to break off, to ride alone toward the marshes, while he led them away. Protect the fragment. Should both of us fall, America falls with us. The entry ended abruptly. He flipped ahead, only to find the next page torn clean out. A ragged edge, deliberate. Someone, at some point in the past 250 years, had removed it. Jonathan sat back, heart pounding. Whatever happened next, someone did not want recorded. And yet the journal continued after the missing page. Nathaniel's eyes strained in the fading light as he turned to the next brittle page. The ink here was darker, the handwriting more hurried, as though Nathaniel had written these words under duress. April 18, 1775. Tonight the riders set out, but not as the histories will one day claim. Revere was only one of them, and not even the most important. Jonathan leaned closer. Dr. Joseph Warren summoned me at twilight. He entrusted me with a mission separate from Revere's, one that could not be spoken aloud, even to the Sons of Liberty. I was to escort an observer operative, codename Lumen, to a location known only as Site 19. Jonathan blinked. Site 19? There was no such place in colonial records. Lumen carried with him a fragment of the device, one that, if captured by the Crown, would shift the balance of forces indescribably. The British regulars had orders far beyond seizing rebel munitions. They sought the observers themselves. Jonathan felt a chill dance across his arms. We rode southwest under moonless skies, avoiding the main roads. Lumen kept his hood low, though I sensed he needed no light to navigate. His presence made even the horses uneasy. At one point, he warned me, "The path diverges tonight. You must choose whether to follow history or truth." The next lines were smudged, as if Nathaniel's hand.
April 22, 1775, the moment the fragment was taken. Nathaniel's handwriting was uneven, as if written with shaking hands, ink blotting at the edges. The fragment never hit the ground. Jonathan inhaled sharply as he read the next line. Something caught it, something I could not see. He frowned. Not someone, something. Nathaniel continued. The air above the pedestal shimmered like heat distortion. Then a shape emerged, first an outline, then a figure draped in a cloak of shifting patterns. Jonathan felt the hairs rise at the back of his neck. It was a person, no taller than Lumen, but entirely veiled in moving geometry. Symbols slid across their surface like drifting constellations. Nathaniel wrote a single word beneath it. Observer. Jonathan froze. Until now, the observers had felt theoretical, distant, nearly mythical. This was the first time he saw one described. Nathaniel continued. The chamber reacted to its presence. The spirals brightened. The walls leaned inward. Even the riders halted. Elias shouted, "Fall back, Nathaniel! Don't look at its face!" Nathaniel scribbled, "I was not sure it had a face." The observer spoke. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once, a layered echo, calm, resonant, patient. It said, "The divergence has exceeded containment." Jonathan swallowed. The gate behind us trembled like liquid glass. The shadow riders bowed their heads, not in respect, but in fear. The observer lifted the fragment. This device was never meant to exist in fractured timelines, it said. Yet here it is, borne by hands incapable of understanding it. A second line beneath it hastily added, "I realized then that we were all pawns. Even the observers feared what was coming." Elias confronts the observer. Nathaniel wrote, Elias stepped forward, weapons drawn. "You should have intervened earlier," he snapped. "You knew Lumen was compromised." The observer replied, "Intervention accelerates collapse. Observation preserves stability." Jonathan whispered, "Then why appear now?" The journal answered him. "Because collapse is now inevitable," the observer said. A cold dread tightened Jonathan's chest. The shattering of Lumen. Lumen rose to his feet, or rather, he floated. The blue light in his eyes surged. He addressed the observer. "You abandoned us," he said. "You left the shadow world to rot while the prime world prospered." The observer responded, "The shadow world is a consequence, not a creation." Jonathan paused. A consequence of what? Nathaniel continued. Lumen screamed, not in pain, in fury. His form split into 3 shimmering silhouettes before rejoining. The rider lanterns flared. The chamber walls buckled. Elias shouted, "Nathaniel, run!" But Nathaniel didn't. The tear widened. The observer raised the fragment. It pulsed, once, violently. The tear in the air above the pedestal widened into a gash of blinding white. Through it I saw a landscape of shadows and twin moons, and marching toward us in impossible numbers, more riders. The next line was jagged. Too many. A choice forced by time. The observer extended its other hand toward me. "Nathaniel Brooks," it said. "You must decide, close the fracture or complete it." Jonathan froze mid-breath. The next lines were underlined so deeply the paper was nearly torn. "Close it, and the shadow world dies. Complete it, and both worlds merge forever." Elias cried out, "Don't believe it. They want the merge. The observers need it to reset the timeline." Lumen screamed, "Merge them! Restore what was lost!" The riders advanced. The observer waited. Elias struggled to rise. Lumen flickered violently. The chamber cracked. Two worlds pressed against each other like grinding plates. And Nathaniel, he wrote only one final line before the entry ended. "I stepped toward the light." Nathaniel's handwriting changed here, firmer, almost unnervingly steady. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the chamber behind me vanished. Jonathan blinked. Vanished. Nathaniel clarified. Not faded, not dissolved, vanished, as though it had never been. No sound, no heat, no color. Only light, white and formless. Between worlds. I was not in the prime world, nor in the shadow world. I was in the seam. The seam. Jonathan recognized the term from the Chronicle texts. A boundary between realities, a place mortals weren't meant to stand. Nathaniel described it. Gravity softened. My thoughts slowed. Time frayed into strands I could almost touch. Around him the worlds flickered like twin lanterns, one brighter, sharp, and familiar. Prime. One dark, distorted, endlessly shifting. Shadow. And both were pulling on him. The observer joined him. The observer emerged beside me, its form less solid here, like a cloak made from equations unraveling. It said, "The seam reveals truth without mercy." Then it gestured, and Nathaniel saw. The origin of the shadow world. For the first time the truth was written plainly. The shadow world was not born naturally. It is a byproduct of choices erased from the prime timeline. Jonathan felt his breath catch. Nathaniel continued. Every event the observers corrected, every catastrophe they prevented, every path they deemed unstable, those rejected histories accumulated. They congealed into a world made of discarded futures. Nathaniel wrote, "The prime timeline thrives because the shadow absorbs its corruption." Jonathan shut his eyes. That means prime prosperity exists only because shadow suffers. Lumen's truth. Through the seam, Nathaniel saw Lumen again, down below, screaming from the chamber. But this time the scream had meaning. Lumen was born in the shadow, a child of discarded time, an echo that should not exist. He wasn't a savior, he wasn't a guide, he was a consequence. The choice becomes clearer and worse. The observer said, "Close the fracture," and the shadow collapses, all its inhabitants erased. Jonathan shivered. The shadow world had people, versions of people, whole histories. Nathaniel wrote, "I saw them, millions, flickering in the dark." The observer continued, "Merge the worlds, and the prime timeline dissolves into uncertainty. History unravels. War between realities erupts. Jonathan whispered, "No good choice." Nathaniel agreed. Both choices were destruction. Then the observer said something Nathaniel wrote in bold strokes. "You were not chosen to decide. You were created to." Jonathan froze. Created. Nathaniel's impossible revelation. The observer raised a hand. A beam of light punctured the seam. Nathaniel stared and saw himself. Hundreds of him. Thousands. Infinitely branching. They were all me, but older, younger, wounded, triumphant, dead. Echoes from discarded timelines, all leading to this one. The observer said, "Across all versions, your path is the convergence point. You are the fulcrum between worlds." Nathaniel wrote, "I understood finally. I existed in both worlds, simultaneously. Prime Nathaniel, Shadow Nathaniel, two halves of the same consciousness. And here in the seam, I was whole." The choice is made. The final lines of the entry became breathless, ink smudged, hurried. I reached out to the fracture, feeling both worlds screaming. I made my decision. I chose. The sentence ended there. The page ended there. The journal stopped. Jonathan stared, his breath shallow, heart pounding in the dim lantern glow of the archive chamber. The ink stopped mid-sentence, mid-stroke, as if the quill had been ripped from Nathaniel's hand, or as if the moment of writing itself had been stolen.
The chamber dimmed, not like a room losing light, but like a world losing certainty. Jonathan's breath fogged as the temperature plunged, frost spiraled across the floating platform, creeping up the chains of pale light that held it in place. Every stone, every rune, every mirror hummed with imminent rupture. Nathaniel staggered, his form splitting into 3 flickering silhouettes before rejoining. Each re-emerge seemed to cost him, pieces of himself snapping out of sync. "Jonathan," he whispered, clutching the center of his chest as another fracture opened along his arm, light leaking through like a broken conduit. "Hurry." Jonathan stared helplessly. "I don't know how. I don't know what I'm supposed to do." Nathaniel forced a trembling smile. "You'll know once you step onto the anchor dais." Jonathan looked toward the far end of the platform, where a circular stone disc hovered, carved with spirals and intersecting lines, the same symbols etched throughout the journal, the same sigils that glowed whenever Nathaniel touched them. The anchor dais, the place where Nathaniel had become the seam's guardian, the place where Jonathan was meant to replace him. Jonathan's pulse thundered in his ears. "No, there has to be another way." Nathaniel's expression softened, a solemn understanding tinged with despair. "Every version of me tried to find another way. Every single one failed." Before Jonathan could speak, a sound tore across the room. A harmonic chime that wasn't a sound at all. The observers arrived. One by one they stepped through thin slits in the air, each passing through reality as though it were silk. They drifted more than walked, cloaks shifting in cascading patterns of geometric light. Their faces were smooth, unreadable, shaped from a material older than language. There were 5 of them, but Jonathan understood instinctively. 1 observer was catastrophic. 5 meant something worse. They gathered at the far edge of the observatory floor, silent, patient, their heads tilted in eerie synchronization, watching Jonathan the way a biologist studies a specimen. One stepped forward. its cloak folded inward, revealing a pale, featureless surface in place of a face. "Prime anomaly, Jonathan Hale," it said, its voice a layered resonance that vibrated in Jonathan's bones. "You carry the journal, the Chronicle, the fulcrum's echo. You stand in the convergence chamber by invitation, but you do not yet fulfill your function." Jonathan stiffened. "Function? You think I'm a tool?" The observer's head rotated slightly, a gesture Jonathan couldn't interpret. "All sentient constructs serve function. You, however, remain incomplete." Jonathan drew himself up. "I'm not a construct." "Not yet." Jonathan's blood ran cold. Behind him, Nathaniel let out a pained gasp as another fracture split him open, this time from collarbone to sternum. He fell to one knee, light pouring from the crack, illuminating the chamber with a wavering, dying glow. Jonathan rushed to him. "Nathaniel!" The observers reacted. All five turned sharply, focusing on Nathaniel with sudden intensity. The nearest observer raised a hand. Nathaniel screamed. A vibration tore through him, ripping a vertical fissure down his spine. His body split into overlapping versions again, dozens this time, each flickering out of phase, their screams overlapping in a dissonant chorus that churned Jonathan's stomach. "Stop it!" Jonathan roared. "You're killing him!" The observer lowered his hand. Nathaniel collapsed, trembling violently, struggling to hold himself together. The central observer stepped forward. "Nathaniel Brooks has held the anchor function longer than any prior fulcrum. His fragmentation exceeds stability parameters." Jonathan's hands curled into fists. "He's not a machine. He is a deviation. A self-aware anchor was never intended." Jonathan felt something break inside him. "You're monsters." The observer tilted his head. "Incorrect. We are custodians. We maintain the prime timeline's integrity by removing its corrupted branches. The shadow world absorbs discarded paths. The prime world prospers. This is balance." Nathaniel lifted his head weakly. "Jonathan, don't listen to them." Jonathan knelt beside him. Nathaniel's voice was fading, flickering like a candle trapped in a draft. "Not machines, not monsters. There's something worse." Jonathan leaned closer. "What?" Nathaniel's voice dropped to a thread. "They think they're right." The observer stepped forward in unison, forming a semicircle. The central observer extended a hand toward Jonathan. "Jonathan Hale, it is time to complete your function. Approach the dais. Accept the anchor mantle." Jonathan's throat tightened. "You expect me to erase myself?" "The fulcrum must be neutral, without identity, without choice, without flaw. You will become the seam's boundary. You will persist. You will maintain separation." Jonathan shook his head violently. "No, I won't abandon who I am." Another observer stepped forward. "Identity is an inefficiency. A fulcrum with identity fractures, as Nathaniel Brooks did." Nathaniel let out a coughing laugh that dissolved into a pained shudder. "Guess I upset their precious plans." Jonathan glared at the observers. "You can't force me." The observer paused. Then, "We do not need to. Collapse will compel you." Jonathan's breath hitched. The observer stepped back slightly, not retreating, but watching, waiting. Jonathan felt the air tighten. A sound like distant thunder rolled through the observatory. Then another. The walls trembled, mirrors cracked, runes dimmed then flared in a chaotic rhythm, and the air itself bent. Nathaniel clawed weakly toward Jonathan. "It's happening. The worlds are slipping." Jonathan looked up at the observatory's domed ceiling, at the cracks forming across the stone, and the flickering tears that opened between them, revealing glimpses of shadowed forests, dark oceans, unfamiliar stars. Two worlds pressing together, compressing, crushing. "Nathaniel, Jonathan, you have to choose." Jonathan shook his head desperately. "No, I can't do what they want." Nathaniel grabbed his wrist, his fingers flickering like sparks. "Then don't do what they want. Do what neither world expects." Jonathan stared at him, breath shaking. "What does that mean?" Nathaniel's body flickered faster, pieces of him breaking off like fragments of glass and dissolving into light. His voice trembled. "You're not replacing me, Jonathan." Jonathan swallowed hard. "Then what?" Nathaniel looked up at him, eyes burning with fractured resolve. "You're finishing what I began." Jonathan's pulse froze. "What? What did you begin?" Nathaniel's flickering hand pressed the journal against Jonathan's chest. "The third path." The observer stirred, the chamber shook harder, and the rift overhead yawned open like a wound. Jonathan clutched the journal and stepped toward the dais. The dais pulsed, not with light, not with power, but with attention. Jonathan felt it the moment he stepped on the first floating stone leading to it. The air sharpened. The runes lining the walkway shifted subtly, reorienting their spirals to follow his movement, as though the observatory itself was watching him, assessing him. Behind him the observer stood utterly still, waiting, expectant. Beside them Nathaniel flickered violently, a silhouette made of overlapping selves, dissolving faster now, pieces of him shedding like dying embers. Every scream he bit back drove Jonathan's steps harder, faster. He forced himself not to look back. If he looked back, he'd stop. If he stopped, both worlds burned. He reached the center of the dais. The moment his foot touched it, the world exhaled. A resonance surged through the chamber, a deep, harmonic hum that rippled through the mirrors and broke across the floating platforms. Jonathan staggered as invisible weight settled onto his skull and spine. It wasn't painful, just inevitable, like gravity discovering him. The observers spoke in unison. "Fulcrum alignment initiated." Jonathan sucked in a breath. He felt the seam. Not saw, felt, like a second heartbeat, like a